I want to note for the record, we did invite the U.S. Department of State to be here. They have deferred. I don't think it was the denial, although it could be. We'll wait and see. They wanted to wait until the report came out. We have asked them before to come, so hopefully this time will be the charm. I would note also parenthetically that this is about my 40th plus exclusively focused hearing on religious freedom, and I have to tell you, I think it is getting demonstrably worse in the world. I think Chairman Frank's comment about the United States, while we may not look like some of the most egregious violators ever, hopefully that never happens, there is a shift, and it is coming from the top here, and I will say this absolutely publicly from the President of the United States, that I find very disconcerting when it comes to religious freedom. And if we follow that pathway of worship as opposed to the free exercise of our religious liberties, we are in very grave trouble, and the crowding out of the public square of religiously based voices will follow and is already at risk. I also want to point out again, and I think for the record, that this is the largely forgotten rough road that IRFA took or traveled to enactment is remembered well by me, as well as by the bill's chief author, Frank Wolf. Sitting right where you sat, as well as in 2172, Mr. Chairman, was repeatedly John Shattuck, the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, the point person for the Clinton administration, who was against, I repeat, underscore, exclamation point, against enactment of IRFA. Claimed that it would create a hierarchy of human rights, and frankly, it wasn't until it passed House and Senate and almost died in the Senate because of White House opposition. When it was finally passed, President Clinton did sign it. And a year later, I asked the ambassador at large, any hierarchy of human rights, any crowding out of other internationally recognized human rights, and he said absolutely not. So it was a bogus issue there, but I am concerned that that mindset has persisted in some quarters, in some political circles to this day. And when you have non-enforcement of a statute that says shall and shall and shall, and we do not get enforcement of the bill, or the law, I should say, it suggests that some of those old thoughts may still be very prevalent among people who are in policymaking positions. So we will do a hearing on non-enforcement. And when state finally comes, I'm going to ask a lot of pointed questions. I hope they have great answers. We all should be on the same team on this. There should be no divide whatsoever. Well, right now there is a divide. And again, John Shattuck sat where you sat. And on the record, because I held all the hearings that led to IRFA, every single hearing in the House of Representatives, and every single time the administration was against, until they were for, and they were presented a fait accompli, an engrossed bill sent over by the Senate after the House had passed it, and it came back over here, I should say, and then down to the White House for signature, and then he signed it. And we weren't even sure up to the last moment. 11:59, the clock was ticking. We weren't sure he did sign it. And we're grateful for that, but now implement it. A couple of questions, if I could, and you've been, all of you, so patient with this, all the delays today, but on Pakistan, one of our witnesses will soon testify, Mr. Khan, and he makes the point regarding Pakistan, which I agree with you ought to be a CPC country. It's amazing that it is not, although no one's being designated anymore. But he points out that the 50-word penal code ordinance called Section 295C and is such remarkably broad language that virtually anyone can register a blasphemy case against anyone else in Pakistan, and the accused can face capital punishment. There needs to be serious pushback by the entire international community when those kinds of laws are used and people live in fear that any neighbor who may have a disagreement or any political figure or anyone can accuse you of something and your life is literally at risk, and that goes doubly, of course, for Christians. But he points out that 2 of the 5 anti-blasphemy laws explicitly target by name the activities of the Ahmadi Muslim community. If you could speak to that.
Yes, this is a matter I am very, very concerned about, and that our commission is very concerned about. The abuse of the Ahmadis, who are a peaceful religious group, simply wanting to practice their faith in peace, respecting everybody else's right to practice their beliefs and religion in peace, is one of the outrages of the world today. And Pakistan is in the lead. It's not the only country that persecutes the Ahmadis. We've had the same problem in Saudi Arabia, for example. But Pakistan is in the lead, and its oppressive blasphemy laws and the singling out of the Ahmadis is really behind this. So we want to put as much pressure as we can on the Pakistani regime to eliminate that practice, eliminate those blasphemy laws, which are pretexts for persecution, and particularly to respect the full citizenship, not only the rights to practice their religion, but the full citizenship of the Ahmadis, and to not relegate them to second-class citizenship simply for expressing their faith in a peaceful way. Now, of course, Ahmadis are not alone in being persecuted by the Pakistani regime. We've got Christians who are persecuted. Of course, you know all too well the case of the church that was burned back in September in Peshawar with, I believe, close to 100 fatalities. There are Hindus who are persecuted. There are minority Muslims like Shias who are persecuted there. It's a very serious offender, and that, Congressman Smith, Chairman Smith, is why we put Pakistan as #1 on the list of offenders among those not currently designated as CPCs. And we strongly urge, I can't emphasize enough how strongly we urge the State Department to list them as a CPC.
Appreciate that very much. One of our other witnesses today, a man that you know very well, I've read his book, God's Double Agent, Bob Fu. Unfortunately, it appears that China, Vietnam, and North Korea are in a race to the bottom when it comes to religious persecution. And China, despite all of the happy talk between some of our diplomats, has upped the ante. It has been bad. It is actually getting worse under Xi Jinping. One of my other hats that I wear is as chairman of the China Commission. And we will be having a Tiananmen Square hearing next Friday with 5 people who were there. And I can already tell you, having talked to them, and getting a sense of what they're going to talk about, all human rights in general have deteriorated significantly since Tiananmen Square. But on religious freedom, whether it be the Falun Gong, the underground Christian church, the Catholic or Protestants, the Uyghurs, and of course the Tibetan Buddhists, there is a wholesale effort to eradicate the church. And I'm wondering, I don't know what it takes to get this administration to raise the issue. We had a hearing in this room. It was in 2172. We heard from 5 daughters, and we called it the 5 daughters, all of their dads are political prisoners. Gao Zhejiang is one of those, and he has represented Christians in the underground church, the Falun Gong. He has been tortured to the point where I don't know how he survived the torture. His wife, who has testified before, his daughter, who testified at this one. And where's the press when we do any of these kinds of things? There seems to be a lack of concern about. Well, the Washington Post, Fred Hyatt, wrote a brilliant essay, an op-ed, on his own editorial page about the 5 daughters. And what their one ask was, can we meet with President Obama? He has 2 daughters. He'll understand. We contacted the White House. We wrote. We never got a letter back. We did get a phone call that he's too busy, President of the United States, to meet 5 wonderful, articulate, loving daughters of 5 political dissidents who are being tortured. What does it take to get this administration to focus on China, Vietnam, like I said, which is bad and getting worse? As you know, we had Father Lloyd testify at the Lantos Commission hearing recently. You know that well because you were there. I met with Father Loy and I asked him a question. He was under house arrest, same place. He Skyped in from that same location. When I was there last time, he had bully boys outside of his small home, his mother's home. And when he walked me out, he says, that's as far as I can go, because they'll be nice seemingly at first, and then they won't be so nice as they push me back in with fists into the room. And I asked him a pointed question, and he did answer it. It is far worse than it was even then. If you could speak to some of these Asian countries, especially China and Vietnam. North Korea, I think, couldn't be clearer how bad that is. But certainly Vietnam is getting, considered, very much considered for TPP. And I've asked repeatedly, is human rights on the table? Is part of the, we've had human rights dialogues, but they seem to be cul-de-sacs, where an end game is to have a discussion, but it is not connected to other foreign policy issues like trade. So if you could.
Certainly, Congressman Smith. As far as Vietnam is concerned, it is a serious offender. It should be a CPC, and we have recommended it for CPC status. I should add something or repeat something I mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman, which is that we know that Vietnam does respond to these pressures because we've seen it happen in the past, and then they backslid when they were removed from CPC status. So the obvious answer is, let's hit them again. Let's put them back on the CPC list and see if we can bring some more pressure and get some more relief of the suffering of persecuted people, whether they are Catholics, whether they are Buddhists, whatever their belief is, by the Vietnam regime, which is a world-class offender against religious liberty. Now, you mentioned that the situation in China is deteriorating. This entirely squares, Mr. Chairman, with our findings on the Commission. And you also point out the wide range of different shades of belief held by people who are persecuted for those beliefs in China. China qualifies as an equal opportunity religious freedom abuser. There doesn't seem to be any group whose religious freedom rights they will not trample upon. From the Falun Gong to the Uyghur Muslims, as you pointed out, to, of course, Catholics, Protestants, it doesn't matter. Now, I suspect that part of what's going on there is this, that China has learned all too well what they regard as the lessons of the fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union permitted, in China's view, imprudently, the Catholic Church to function as a refuge, as an alternative authority structure, as an independent institution of civil society in Poland. And that gave a base of operations for human rights activists and solidarity and so forth. And what began in Poland soon spread to the other countries of Eastern Europe and resulted in the collapse of the entire Soviet Empire. My own perception here, I speak for myself on this particular point, Congressman Smith, rather than the entire Commission. Not that I think they don't share my view, I just don't happen to know what their view is, but to share my own personal view with you. I think the Chinese regime sees what happened there, and they do not want to permit any alternative authority structures or independent institutions of civil society to exist, lest they provide the fertile ground and the support structure for human rights activism that will, in the end, topple the unjust, oppressive, undemocratic regime that the great hero Bob Fu has done so much to expose. So that's what I think is going on, and helps to explain why they seem to be so eager to stamp out and utterly control, if they can't stamp out, any religious organization of any type, even organizations that don't seem to fit at least our Western classic ideas of religion, like the Falun Gong. They're brutal toward the Falun Gong. We have recommended designation of China for CPC status since 1999. So this goes all the way back really to the beginning of our commission. They're of course designated by the State Department. We renew that this year. Pressure needs to be brought on China. Let me urge you, Chairman Smith, to urge the five daughters and the people who are working with the five daughters to not give up on your request to meet, get a meeting for them with President Obama. President Obama does have daughters. I think he would understand. It's not my place, speaking on behalf of the Commission, to criticize the President. I will say this. What the President said about religious freedom throughout the world, including in China, at the National Prayer Breakfast, are words that you or I would have been proud to say. I know the President in his heart believes those words. So let's just press every button we can to get the President's attention. He has many, many things on his mind. It's a complicated world. He's the President of the United States. To get his attention focused on religious freedom abuses, especially in places like like China. I think this is a case where, if I can quote the story in the gospel that Jesus tells of the unjust judge. Remember the woman before the unjust judge in the Bible who's wanting justice, and the unjust judge doesn't care for God or man, and he's not going to give her justice. He's going to do whatever's convenient to him, until she becomes so persistent that he decides to give her justice in her case because she just won't give up and she's driving him crazy. Well, I think we should, I don't want to analogize the president to an unjust judge at all. That's not my point here. But my point is to emphasize the need for persistence, especially with leaders who have many, many different things on their mind. But I think it would be very important and valuable for the president to meet with the 5 daughters. Let their stories and the stories of their fathers resonate in the president's ears. And I think that would move him to take some steps to, at least at a minimum, up the rhetorical pressure on China. Now we have to realize that China is a complicated case for U.S. foreign policy. Obviously, there are important trade considerations. There are important geostrategic, military considerations that apply in any thinking about China. But that's why it's up to us to be so persistent in pressing our policymakers all the way up the line to the very top to keep the focus on the religious freedom abuses. We're never going to make any progress toward democratization and true respect for human rights in China until we address the religious freedom violations that are so rampant and have been, well, going all the way back really to the revolution that put Mao into power after the Second World War.
I do have many questions, but I'll just ask one final and submit the others for the record. I noticed that obviously you name Iraq as a country that ought to be a CPC country. Yeah. And obviously Iraq is a place where so many of our service members gave blood and have come home wounded. And it really is unconscionable that in a place that we liberated along with our coalition forces and the Iraqis themselves would become a bastion of intolerance towards religious freedom. And I'm wondering if you might want to speak on that issue as well, because obviously that's an area where, again, we have paid such a price. Yeah.
My heart breaks for the victims of persecution, and especially religious persecution in Iraq. Life has moved from one nightmare to another nightmare to another nightmare for these poor people. And they're people of different faiths. It's not just one community whose members are being victimized here. They suffered under the monstrous regime of Saddam Hussein, sadistic beyond belief. They suffered through a terrible war where everything did not go just as we would have liked and as we had hoped. And now they suffer in many cases under persecution. Can I call particular attention, not because I'm myself a Christian and not simply because I think the focus on Christians should be given priority. I don't think that. I think we need to be even-handed in our treatment. But I must mention here the particular suffering of Iraqi Christians, many of whom were forced to flee after the fall of Hussein, and many of whom fled to Syria, where they hoped to find some peace, even under the Assad dictatorship, some peace in the ability to practice their faith without being subjected to violence and persecution. And now what do we find? They're victimized again with violence and persecution in the Syrian civil war, and many of them are now having to flee a second time. It is horrific suffering. So that gives me another opportunity to emphasize our recommendation to list Syria, designate Syria as well, but you're absolutely right to point out that Iraq is a place where our young men and women spent their blood and where all of us spent our treasure in the effort to give them the freedoms that we cherish and enjoy. So we should be especially intolerant of any violations of basic human rights, especially the right to religious freedom, among those who have now gained power in Iraq.
I do have one final, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Like I said, I have many more, but more than 30 years ago, I joined Ronald Reagan at the White House ceremony when he raised the issue of the Baha'i in Iran. And it was a very momentous occasion, and he really helped bring focus for the first time, at least in this country, on the persecution of the Baha'i by Iran. And we know Iran does violate, you talked about equal opportunity in China. Well, they violate the religious freedom of a whole lot of people, including Pastor Abedini. And if you might want to spend a moment, we do have a representative of the Baha'i, Kenneth Bowers, who will be testifying with very strong insights as to how discriminated against and persecuted the Baha'i actually are in Iran. But if you would want to take a moment to just...
The persecution of Baha'is around the world now is an atrocity of the very first rank. I fear, Chairman Smith, that the Baha'is are becoming the Jews of today. My great friend, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of England, points out that throughout much of history, wherever there have been Jews, Jews have been persecuted. And now I fear we're seeing wherever there are Baha'is, Baha'is are persecuted. Thank God not in our own country, but in so many places around the world. And there is a sad and tragic irony here, because the Baha'i faith is a faith that includes centrally the beautiful teaching of the common brotherhood of all men. It's a beautiful teaching. And that a faith that makes that so central would be persecuted almost everywhere is a nightmare. But here we see it. And it's time for all of us, those of us in the human rights advocacy world, those of you in Congress, those in the administration, to take note of what is happening to members of this peaceful faith who do no one any harm, who seek nothing but brotherhood, and yet they are brutally, in many places, persecuted. So we need to elevate and make more visible this fact, so that, to the extent possible, we can become agents for the amelioration and relief of that persecution. So this is a very high priority for me personally. I know it's a high priority for our commission.
Dr. George, thank you, sir, very much for your incisive testimony. It will help inform our committee and hopefully by extension the Congress. We will look very carefully at all your recommendations that you've made, and I hope that we can look to move on them expeditiously. And thank you again. Appreciate your leadership.